Hi, and welcome back to part 3 of the America Home of the Brave quilt. I'm going to give you some quilting ideas in this section, but it's totally your call. We left off on the last lesson where we were trimming away the excess batting on the lettering on the back. Make sure when you do it, you are also trimming away the inner sections, like on the A's and the R's and the B's. Doing this will give you the correct relief on the right side of the panel. I've cut the 1-inch strips for the flange that I'm going to put around the wording banner. And I'm about ready now after I've seamed them all together. And I've done it on the diagonal to make the seam less noticeable. And I'm about ready now to take these strips, or this one long strip now, and just press it in half. And I'm going to do this pressing for the entire strip so that I have a 1/2-inch strip to work with for the flange. The next step is to cut off 2 8.5-inch strips of this flange and stitch to each short side of the wording banner. And you want to stitch this with an 1/8-inch seam so that the stitching will not show when we do our subsequent stitching. You'll continue on in the same manner to both the top and bottom of this banner piece, stitching the sashing in place using an 1/8-inch seam. Your piece should now look like this. Now take 2 pieces of the 8.5-inch sashing strips and stitch 1 piece to each end of this banner strip. You have now completed the 7th row of the quilt, and it's ready to be added to the other part of the quilt you've done so far. For the 8th and final row of the quilt, make the usual quilt row, but add 1 more row of sashing and cornerstones. We'll then join that to the balance of the quilt. I think a lot of you are familiar with my video on basting a quilt. I just wanted to give you a tip here. The batting that I had was a very low loft batting, and I really wanted it a little higher. So I have a low loft 80/20 batting, and I have a low loft polyester batting that I'm marrying together for this quilt. To do that, I'm rolling it on 4 separate tubes. The first tube is my backing fabric. The second tube is my 80/20 blend. The third tube is the polyester batting, and the 4th tube is my quilt. I'll now proceed to pin baste my quilt in place so that my backing nor either one of my battings shift in the process. I try to keep my pins about 4 inches apart. I'm sitting here at my quilting machine, and I wanted to show you something or point something out. Now you can see, and you'll have to excuse me because I am holding the camera in my other hand instead of on a tripod, but you can see right here that I've done some quilting. The other quilting that's been done has been stitching the ditch in these blocks. Now if I pull back out, you can see that the blocks still look kind of blah. It needs something. And I don't know how many of you had seen the original quilt, but it seemed like these areas of the quilt puffed out more. So why aren't they now? Well, let me show you the difference. A little bit of quilting will do. Let's just move on up here and let's just start to see how those blocks start to puff up. Can you see now that this quilting has been done around this block, this has a much puffier look to it than previous blocks. What's happening is it's pushing the batting down here, which allows this to look more raised up. And that's the secret behind your batting. A lot of people want to know what kind of batting that's being used because they want their quilts to look puffy. Well, the secret is how you do the quilting in your squares. If you want a certain area of your squares, for example, I wanted this area to puff up because it's the patriotic section, and it's also probably the plainer section of the quilt. It's just a four-patch or a rail fence. But because I wanted to accent that, I just made sure that I did plenty of heavy quilting around that block to make it puff up. Just a little secret I thought you might like. I'm going to show you how I've done the stitching in between the blocks. It's a very simple wishbone design. It's first outlined, each of these sashing blocks is outlined 1/4 of an inch, and I'm using the ruler foot that came with my machine. You can use whatever foot you do ruler work with. If you don't have a ruler and you don't do ruler work, that's okay too. You can draw a line and stitch along the line. But I'm placing my ruler right on the edge of this strip right here. And I've also placed my foot so that it is right up against this red block. That puts it 1/4 of an inch away from that side. So I'm right in the corner. And now I'm ready to begin my stitching. And when you're doing ruler work, you just want to do slow and steady. This is not a process where you go fast. You just take your time. But you can see what nice straight lines you get. Now I'm slowing down here because I want to stop as soon as my foot hits this red block right here. So that's my stopping point. And then I'm going to bring my ruler around, put it right on the edge of that red block, and come down that side. Keep going until I hit on the edge of this block. Now I'm going to put the ruler again on the edge of that block. I'm going to try very hard to keep my hands out of the way, but it's difficult. And I'm going to stitch down this side. And don't be afraid to stop and slide your ruler if you have to. Now when I get down to the point that my foot is hitting that red block, I stop. And I can either put my foot this way, or since it's such a short distance, I can place it this way and stitch that in. So now I've done all the 1/4 inch stitching around this block. And the reason I do that is it helps to define the stitch that I'm going to make in here. Now, any of you who have taken my lessons back to the basics, this wishbone stitch that we're doing is something that I taught in that series. And I taught you how to do that stitch going forward, backward, upside down, up and down, every which way, so you don't have to keep turning your quilt. So you want to take a look at the stitch itself and realize that you're going to swing out and in. Let me try to do that with something where you can see it. I want to swing out and in. And it's just a series of gentle S-curves that we're going to use here. So here we go. And again, if you watched my series, you know not to watch the needle, but to keep your eye on the 1/4 inch stitch lines, because that's where you want to stop your stitching. And as long as you're looking there, that helps to prevent you from overshooting or undershooting that line. Now I'm getting to the point now that I need to move my hands to make them more effective, because you'll see I always form a hoop with my hands. So I stop the machine, move my hands where they need to be, and then keep going. Still keeping my eye on that stitched line. So I stay within that boundary. Now I need to move my hands again, so I stop, position my hands, and then begin again. And there's another row of sashing completed. So you can see it goes pretty quickly. That's not a difficult design. Like I said, I taught that in my Back to Basics series. So if you're not sure how to do it, you can watch this video again, or you can go back to the Back to Basics series. If you're a member of our group, you can get the workbook and follow along with the muscle memory sheets to help you out. Now I'm going to go ahead and stitch this bottom here, because you can see that I'm at the edge of my quilt. So you might want to see how that's done. Set my thread out of the way here. And I'm going to rethread my machine. And for those who say they can't work with gloves because they always have to take them off to thread a machine, not so much. I very rarely take my gloves off and find that I can do everything I need to do with them on. So I'm going to again put my ruler down against the edge of my block and have the foot along the edge of this block. I'm going to sew a few starter stitches to lock my stitches in place. And stitch along. Now when you get down to this end, remember you have to allow an extra 1/4 inch for the seam allowance. So you want to make sure that you're not going down too far. So what I'm going to do now is, if you look at the one before it, when we did the stitching, we had this Velcro strip actually as the guide along the strip above it. So we're going to stitch along the bottom. And the deal with using rulers is you don't want to push the ruler hard against the foot. You want to push the foot or the ruler down against the quilt. So it's almost like a built-in hand to hold your quilt in place. And now we're just going to stitch up to where we started. Now I'm going to also stitch back down so I can get to a starting place. And now I can do my wishbones again. And now we have the wishbone stitched all the way around this block. So now we have the center of this block having a much puffier effect than it had before we started the stitching and the sashing. As you can see, I've already started doing my pebbles. I run them up underneath the flange, and then the flange can be steam pressed back down over it again. I have outlined the letters A, and I've made sure that my pebbling goes close to that. And I keep traveling down until I get to the various elements like the letters or the stars, and I work them in. And I do that by, you can see I've just done a circle very close, or a pebble rather, very close to that star. So I can just go right in, stitch around that star, and when I end up back to where I started, I can continue on with my pebbling. Now when I get down to the flange, I pull it back, and I just put my pebble right underneath it. Now if you get so close to an element that you can't get a full circle or a full pebble, just do a half of one. For example, down here by the flange, I can do a half one and then work my way back up again. Now here I'm getting close to another star, so I've done my pebble. And now I can continue on stitching the outline around the star. So I get back to where I started from. Now I'll continue on with my pebbling. Well, this will take a while, but it's kind of, after a while, it's kind of fun. It's, to me, a challenge to figure out where I'm going to go next. And if I get myself worked into a corner such as this, where I've already done pebbles all around that pebble, I'll find a pebble that I can hook onto and just ride that pebble around until I get to an open spot. And I'll come down here and fill in down around the star, work my way back up till I get to the M, and now I can stitch around the M. Now you can see that I had already started to do the pebbling on one side of the A, so I can continue down that route, or I can go all the way around the M, like so, and I only have to backtrack just a little bit on previous pebbles. So you have to kind of think this out as you go to avoid the least amount of backtracking or breaking your thread. Don't forget to keep that frame going with your hands. Okay, so now I'm back to where I started. So I, at this point, can ride up and catch back up. Continue on with my pebbles up the side of the M. Because you do want them to be close to the letters, because that's what you're doing, is forcing the batting down all around it so that the letters really puff up. And the same with the stars. The closer you get your pebbles to those stars, the closer they'll puff up. So have fun, take your time. Remember, this is the star of the show, so you don't really want to rush this. Once this portion is finished and all the other quilting is done, you'll be ready to add the crowning touch, which is the binding, and your quilt will be completed. I hope you've enjoyed this series as much as I've enjoyed bringing it to you. Bye for now. You may not be aware that I do all these lessons on my own with no charge to my students. Since I'm retired and living on Social Security, that gets more and more difficult. So I want to offer a thank you to Denise Lewis and Dee Wilson for sending me gift certificates to cover the cost of the fabrics and the threads. Thank you so much, girls.